Okay, so we continue with some equations now. Let me summarize where we are. Last time I've described the equations of combustion, the general equations for combustion, except if you are in a supercritical flow, they are valid everywhere. Then I've told you that we are looking now for simple cases so you understand the nature of combustion. So we simplified the problem for 1D premixed laminar flames at constant pressure. And I told you that the equations we get, you can solve them with software you can find on the market like Chemkin, CoSylab, or Cantera. But that was not enough. What I want to do today, I want to do the resolution of these equations in a more simplified case, and I want to do it by hand, well, actually, with the chalk. To do that, I introduced additional simplification last time. I said I wanted to use a single-step lean reaction where the fuel was controlling the reaction rate. I said all the CPK, the heat capacities, are constant and they are equal. I said the Lewis number, which is the ratio of the heat diffusivity to the species diffusivity, is equal to unity. So the fuel and the heat diffuse in the same way. And I use Fick's law, which is not a limitative approximation for the diffusion velocities. So today what I want to do is finish this demonstration and show you that you can construct the solution which is here for the fuel species here and for the temperature completely by hand. And this will allow me also to show you what's important and what's not important in the physics of a flame. And for example, to show you why this flame is moving. Let me summarize here. The objective is the following. We are in the reference frame of the flame. So the flame is not moving. The flame sees a flow arriving here at a speed u1, which must be equal to SL, where SL is the flame speed. And on the other side of the flame, the flow is leaving here at a speed u2. But in the reference frame of the flame, nothing is moving. So what we showed last time is that the temperature here on this side, T2, had to be equal to T1 plus QYF1 divided by Cp. This is just the adiabatic flame temperature. We could have written this equation actually even before everything else. It just tells you that you have an equilibrium between the initial state here, T1. After combustion, you increase the temperature by this quantity and you reach T2, which is the temperature here. So this is, again, simple thermochemistry. We have the initial state, T1, and we have the final state, T2. But now today we want to see how we go from T1 to T2. The equations here, I'm going to write them again here. The equations we had last time can be simplified to this form. We have one differential equation for the fuel mass fraction, which you can write this way. And here we have the reaction rate of the fuel, which is a negative number. We're going to destroy the fuel. And then we have one equation for temperature, which we can write this way. We have the heat flux here. And the heat release, really the increase of temperature by combustion, is equal to minus Q, this is the heat of the reaction, multiplied by the reaction rate of the fuel. So when 1 gram of fuel disappears, this term is negative, this term is positive, you generate Q joules. These equations are not that simple to solve, okay? We still have two of them, first problem. Now there are all kinds of methods in the literature, and today I will pick up one very, very simple example of a big body of research here, which is called match asymptotics expansion. I should add for beginners, okay? I'm going to do a very, very simple match asymptotic expansion to solve this equation. So let me also here add what omega dot f must be. Omega dot f is nu f wf multiplied by q, where this is the progress of the single reaction. We have a single reaction here. This is the progress of this single reaction. And Q itself is going to be given by a pre-exponential constant multiplied by rho yf over wf exponential minus Ta over T. I've shown that also at the previous course. Here, I have supposed that the oxidizer does not play a role. We have a lot of oxidizer. We don't need to care about the oxidizer. We care only about the fuel. So this corresponds to this assumption. Single-step linear reaction. You can write it this way. Okay, now the point now is that we need to solve these two equations. The first thing we need to do before solving these two equations is to simplify them. They are just too complicated if you want to solve two equations in one shot, especially if you have only an hour like me to do it. So the first thing I'm going to show you is that these two equations actually are the same. They don't look like this, but they are the same. To do that, I introduce a change of variables, which is very classical in the combustion field. I'm going to introduce the reduced temperature, which is T minus T1 divided by T2 minus T1, and a reduced fuel mass fraction, which is YF divided by YF1. So this is a constant. Those are constants also, only the temperature is changing. So instead of T, I'm going to use theta. Why is that useful? Well, if you look at the boundary conditions for these two quantities, so this is state 1 and this is state 2, and you look at theta and y, you see that in the fresh gases the temperature is equal to T1, so theta is 0. And in the burnt gases the temperature goes to T2, so in the fresh gases theta is equal to unity. And of course for the fuel it's the other way. Here y is equal to 1 and theta is equal to and y is equal to 0 in the burnt gases. So you just take these two equations, you divide them by T2 minus T1 and by YF1, and you can find the equation for theta and for y. It's linear, everything is linear, so of course we're going to find the same equation just with theta and y. So it's going to be written ρ1 SL dy dx equal d over dx of rho d dy dx plus omega dot f divided by yf1. And the second equation for temperature will be ρ1 SLCP. No, this Cp goes away, so d theta dx equal d over dx of lambda d theta dx. And here, what you obtain is this. Just because this thing here is actually minus q omega dot f divided by Cp T2 minus T1. And because of the definition of T2, you can show that the reaction rate here is exactly this shape. So why is it useful? Well, you can see where the trick is now. These two equations have the same source term. And this is something you will see in this course here, is that source terms in combustion are not your friends. Because source terms, these terms which are here, are usually nonlinear, complicated, etc. So we like to eliminate them. Here we can construct a variable which does not have source term. We just have to add these two equations. If we add these two equations, we find ρ1 SL d over dx of theta plus y equal d over dx of, there's a Cp here, sorry, of rho d over dx of theta plus y. Because the Lewis number is equal to unity. Remember, lambda over Cp is equal to rho d. So you can directly write it this way. So this is a very simple equation, and this quantity here, I'm going to call it Z. It's what people call the passive scalar. In combustion, we like those guys because they have no source terms. Now, if you look at this equation, and you look at the boundary condition for z, z is the sum of theta plus y. So you see it's 1 in the fresh gases, and it's 1 also in the burnt gases. So now, if you think of an equation like this, saying the first derivative of z is equal to the second derivative of z multiplied by a constant, and with these two boundary conditions, you can do that at home. You will see that there's only one solution, which is z equal 1 everywhere. So in other words, these two variables that we have here, the temperature and the fuel mass fraction, they are linked by this very simple relation. Theta plus y equal unity. Or in other words, we don't need to solve for these two equations. We don't need to solve for these two here. We can solve only for one, and the second one will be given by this equation. Okay? So that makes things simpler for us. So which one are we going to keep? Well, since we like to work with temperature, it's better to keep temperature only. So we're going to keep an equation for theta. So we're going to keep that one. So how does this equation look like? Well, you keep this equation, it will be like this. Rho1 SL d theta dx equal d over dx of rho d theta dx minus omega dot f divided by yf1. Well, this thing is not, if you replace omega dot f by its expression here, you can use also nu f equal minus 1. This is what we have usually for the fuel. We say fuel plus oxidizer goes to product. So the balance from nu f is that it's minus unity. You will find here a reaction rate which is written like this. Plus a rho 1 minus theta exponential minus ta over t. So now in this equation, we only have one variable left. It's the temperature, theta. So this is an exercise now for mathematicians. And this is how actually the whole story started, probably in Russia, more than 100 years ago. There's a guy called Zeldovich, one of the most famous guys in combustion. They liked this equation because it was a very nice exercise for mathematics. How can you solve this equation? This is what I want to show you now. So let me just be more precise here. You see the variable theta, it's here. It's here. This is constant. Well, rho d, I will talk about rho d later. This is a constant, these two. Now you have a constant, but you have rho here, and you have also the temperature. But everything here is also a function of theta. Why is it so? Well, for example, the temperature by definition is T1 plus T2 minus T1 multiplied by theta. So you can replace it here, and it's only a function of the reduced temperature. And for the density is also a function of the temperature because pressure is constant. Since the beginning, I've told you pressure will be constant. So if you know the temperature, you can find the density. So this equation actually can be written rho1 SL d theta dx equal d over dx of rho d d theta dx plus a rho1 over 1 plus T2 minus T1 over T1 theta, 1 minus theta exponential minus Ta So you see now everything is closed. We just have to solve this equation. Okay. These equations, you know, how does this equation look? You know, it's like an equation saying a constant multiplied by the first derivative equal another constant multiplied by the second derivative. I will say that these things are constant for the moment, plus a complicated function of theta. You go to mathematics books, they will tell you, well, this equation is interesting, but this one is easier. You know how to integrate this one, okay? If f is a complex function, then this thing can be complicated. And it takes a few months to learn how to do that. So I'm not going to do it. I'm going to simplify this term. Before I do that, I need to show you that the shape of this function is extremely specific It's very important for combustion. So we need to work a little bit on this function f here. To do that, I'm going to introduce another variable, which is again the famous change of variables for combustion people. I'm just going to change a little bit the way this thing is written. So to do that, we introduce a change of variable, which is the following. We're going to say that alpha is equal to T2 minus T1 divided by T2, and beta is equal to alpha TA over T1. So we could have stuck to T2, T1. It's just that for the mathematics we're going to do now, it's easier to work with these two variables. If you plug this thing into your equation here, you find the following equation now. Rho1 SL, of course, this expression does not change. This one does not change. And the reaction rate takes this funny shape here, which is A, Rho1, 1 over 1 plus alpha theta divided by 1 minus theta. Here you have this is y, 1 minus theta, exponential. That's a constant. And here you get this shape here. Now, why is it useful to write it this way? Well, because you can analyze now this function. Now, it's not so complicated. And you can plot it. And I'm going to plot it for you. If you plot here the reaction rate, which is this term here, versus temperature, this is how it looks. So temperature is 0 here when you are in the fresh gases, and it's 1 when you are in the burn gases. When the temperature is very low, this function is 0, because mainly of the exponential value here. And it takes quite a long time, quite a large value of theta before this function, when you plot it, starts to pick up. But then, of course, when theta equals 1, it must go back to 0. So there is a maximum here. And you can even compute the maximum. For those of you who like to do some derivatives, if you try to look for the maximum value of that, you will see that this thing is maximum for theta equals theta critic equal 1 minus 1 over alpha plus beta, which is of the order of 1 minus 1 over beta, because beta, this number here, is of the order of 5 to 10 to 15, for example. Alpha is of the order of unity. So you see here that, and this is typical of combustion, at low temperatures, here, there is just no combustion. And when the temperature increases, at some point, combustion starts. And we will call this temperature here minus 1 over beta. This is the critical temperature. And this is the basis of the what I call here the match asymptotic expansion, is that the world of combustion can be split in two parts. A zone here where you have no combustion, and a zone here where you have combustion. And this will allow us to solve the problem. May seem surprising to you, but in 5 minutes we will have finished. Well, let's make it 10. So how do we do it? Well, there are two ways, the hard way and the easy way. So we're going to pick up the easy way. The hard way is to do it by keeping this expression. The easy way is to think, well, look at this expression, look at the shape it has. I could replace it by something which would be much nicer to integrate. What would be nicer? Well, we need something linear. I know how to integrate differential equations if they are linear. This one obviously is not, but I could replace that shape by another one. And that was an idea that you can find, for example, in the work of Eceki and Ferziger, who said, well, I don't want to work with that one, it takes too long. I'm going to replace this expression by something which behaves the same way. For example, if I use a function which is exactly the same, which has the same physics, I say I have no combustion until here, and then here suddenly I have combustion and it goes down to 0 here. So if I replace this shape by this shape, I keep a lot of things similar in the physics of the problem. I still burn at a high temperature, I don't burn at a low temperature, and I can solve the problem then analytically, which is what I'm going to do now. So the model is going to be the following. We're going to say that the reaction rate is 0 if the temperature is less than the critical temperature 1 minus 1 over beta. And this equation, I know how to integrate it. It's a linear equation. So here, the equation which I'm going to have is ρ1 SL theta prime equal ρ1 d theta second. I have used an additional simplification here. I'm saying that rho d is equal to ρ1 d is equal to constant. That's the last assumption I need to keep it simple for you. And I'm going to say that the reaction rate is a function which I'm going to write ρ1 r multiplied by 1 minus theta if theta is larger than theta critical. You see this shape here is exactly this curve which goes from this point to 0. Here it's a straight line. So it's a linear function. So here the problem I have to solve on this side is ρ1 SL theta prime equal ρ1 d theta second plus ρ1 r 1 minus theta. Now things have changed. Those are all linear equations. I have played a trick here because I'm using the shape of the physical functions which I had initially, but I've changed it to be completely in a linear world now. And these things I can integrate them. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to say that the point x equal to 0 is going to be the point in my flame where the temperature will be equal to the critical temperature. Which means basically I'm going to solve this equation on this side and this equation on the other side. The temperature will go like this. It will go up to theta critical, and then it will continue to go up to 1. Here I have unity. So let me first solve the equation on the left-hand side. This equation, you know, to integrate it, okay? It's SL theta prime equal d. I have simplified by density. Now I can integrate it to find SL theta equal d theta prime plus a constant. What is the constant? Well, if the temperature is equal to 0 here, the derivative of temperature is equal to 0, so the constant must be 0 too. So this must be 0. Now, how do you integrate that? You say theta prime over theta equal SL over d. And the solution of that, as you know, is theta equal a constant multiplied by exponential SL over d x. What is the constant? Well, I said at x equal to 0, the temperature should be equal to the critical temperature. I have decided to put my flame there. So this expression is nothing else than theta c equal c divided by delta, where delta is, and we call that the flame thickness. Why is it so? Well, because, you know, if you have a function like this one, exponential x over delta, and you take the slope here, you will have delta. So it's very close to a way to measure the steepness of the gradient or the thickness of the profile. This is why we call it the flame thickness. And you see here that there's nothing magical in this zone. The profile of temperature will be written like this. And this is what we call the preheat zone. Because this is the place where the gases are not burning at all, they're just being heated before they reach that point. No combustion, very simple equation as you can see here. So it's over for the left-hand side. What do I do for the right-hand side? Well, I need to integrate this equation now. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated, but as you will see, it's a linear equation. For linear equations, what we do usually is we just have to presuppose the shape of the solution. And we know it's going to be an exponential. So we're going to write the solution under this form. We're going to write the solution on the... So if temperature is larger than the critical temperature, we write the solution under this shape, 1 minus b exponential gamma x. And gamma has to be negative, okay? Because when x goes up, I don't want temperature to jump like this, okay? I want temperature to go to unity, so gamma has to be negative. Well, you replace this value in this equation, and you find something very simple. For example, for the left-hand side, you find ρ1 SL multiplied by minus b gamma. All the exponentials are going to disappear. Then for the diffusion term, you find minus ρ1d b gamma square, and then you're left plus ρ1 rb. And so you end up with a very simple equation, which is d gamma square minus SL gamma minus R equals 0. And the unknown is gamma. Remember, we are looking for gamma. So there are two solutions for gamma. You keep only the negative one, because we don't want the positive one. And so the negative solution of this equation is gamma equal 1 over 2 times the diffusion coefficient multiplied by SL minus the square root of SL square plus 4RD. And we got it. We have gamma. What is B? Well, it's easy to find B, because at x equal to 0, the temperature must be the critical temperature. So B obviously has to be equal to 1 minus theta C. It's good to do some math from time to time. You forgot, huh? Okay, so the final shape of this curve here is 1 minus theta critical exponential gamma x, where gamma is equal to that. And you see, I have the temperature now. I can find the species. It's just 1 minus the temperature. So the problem is solved completely, or not. Actually, the problem is not solved yet. I have shown you how to solve things on one side of that, and how to solve things on the other side. There's one thing I haven't done yet. It's to do what we called initially this matched asymptotic expansion. I have not matched these two profiles. I have one solution on the left side, one solution on the right side. They match already. They match because they are continuous here for the temperature. Temperature is continuous. But there's something I did not do. I did not match the heat flux. I did not match d theta dx at x equals 0 on the left and on the right. And you could tell me, well, what can you match? Because you have the two profiles already. Everything is written here. Well, it's not true. There is still something which is unknown. I have told you that last time. There's something from the beginning I have told you. Suppose we know the flame speed, SL. But I didn't know the flame speed. Well, it's the time to find the flame speed. There is only one flame speed which will ensure this quantity here, this property. Otherwise, what we will have is the following. If we take a flame speed which is not the right one, we'll have a profile like this one, and here the temperature will do like this, or like that. And here we will not have a continuous derivative. If we want to have a continuous derivative, we need to have this property here. And if you replace these two things here, you find a very simple property, which is the following. This quantity on the left side is SL divided by D multiplied by theta critical. You just have to differentiate this quantity here. And this one on the left side, on the right side, is 1 minus theta C gamma. You differentiate this equation, this one. And there is only one value of SL, which is such that you have a continuous heat flux here. And the value of SL, when you replace it here, you find just the following solution. SL, and that's the important result here, is equal to square root of RD divided by beta multiplied by beta minus 1. Which is almost equal to 1 over beta square root of RD. And that's the end of the demo. Why is it important? Well, it tells you why your flame is moving. Look at this formula. It tells you what makes the flame speed. You could think that to have a fast flame, it's important to have a high reaction rate. The reaction rate here is R, the constant which is here. When it's higher, it means you have more combustion. But you see that when you increase the reaction rate, it's not sufficient. What's controlling also the flame speed is the diffusion. The diffusion of the species, the diffusion of the heat. If you have zero diffusion, you don't have a flame speed. So diffusion there is essential. No diffusion, no propagation. And diffusion and reaction, they work together to make the flame move. And how does it work? Well, if you're on that side, for a long, long period of time, it's only diffusion which gets you heated. Because this point is hot, heat is diffusing, and it's bringing you to the temperature at which you can burn. If you cannot reach this temperature, you cannot burn. Okay, there's like a jump here. You have to go to this point, and then you can jump and burn. As long as you are cold, you cannot go to this point. So this is really where the physics is important. So you have this zone here where you have to diffuse, and this is why D is important. And then after that you have to burn, and of course to burn you need to have a high reaction rate, R. And it's the combination of the two which makes the flame move. And if you do the complete derivation with the exponential and the Arrhenius form I had before, you find almost the same thing. It's given in the book. I don't want to do it here. It's almost exactly the same formula. So let me summarize then what we're doing now. And I want to compare actually for this flame. Again, I come back to what I said about thermochemistry. And kinetics. I told you that thermochemistry is the way you go from the initial state to the final state. Okay, so initially when we did that for real flames, for complex chemistry, and this is the exercise you should have done now because it's on the web, it's basically you compute the final temperature as a result of the initial mass fractions and the initial temperature. In a simplified case where the one we have just done, we have seen that this formula is very simple. It's T2 equal T1 plus Q YF1 over Cp. So this is really thermochemistry. Initial state, final state. No one knows at which speed you go from one to the other. Okay? No one cares. Now what about speed? Now you just found the speed. The speed is 1 over beta square root of the reaction coefficient multiplied by the diffusion coefficient. Of course, in a real flame here, SL is a function of all the diffusion coefficient of all the species, all the pre-exponential constant, all the activation temperature. There are lots of them here. Don't need to worry about that because the physics in the two cases is the same. The important physics is written here. And I would just like to see one thing here, is that the quantities which control the adiabatic flame temperature, the temperature on this place here, are not the same than the quantity which control this one. Again, you're going from Paris to Toulouse. This is just Paris to Toulouse. The speed at which you go from Paris to Toulouse is something different. It's this guy here. And it does not depend on the same thing. So every year we see the same mistakes after that. For example, if you have a flame, you're computing a flame and it's too cold. It's not useful to try to increase this or this, because this quantity changes only the flame speed. They won't play any role on this quantity. In other words, if your train is going to Lyon and you wanted to go to Toulouse, it's not worth going faster or more slowly. You will always arrive at the same place. It's the same for combustion. In the same way, if your flame is going too slowly, it's not worth playing with those things here. You have to play with those things here. Okay, so you see the difference between thermochemistry and kinetics. Before I finish that, I want to point out also a very simple and important property that we've seen here, the flame thickness. The flame thickness here is exactly what you believe it is. It is the thickness of the front over which you get reaction rates going on. There's a simple way to remember this number. You can write it like this: SL multiplied by delta divided by the diffusion coefficient equal to unity. You see, this is exactly like a Reynolds number. Velocity multiplied by length divided by diffusion equal to unity. That means the Reynolds coefficient, the Reynolds number of the flame is equal to 1. It means also that if the flame goes faster, it's going to be smaller. That's going to help, as you will see in a few minutes. So why is it useful to have a guide like this in terms of theory instead of just relying on codes? Well, because once you have these guidelines here, you can do a lot of other things which I'm going to describe now. Let's begin with the changes of flame speeds and flame thicknesses with pressure and temperature. Initially, when people started measuring flame speed, they did that at atmospheric pressure and at 300 K. But then the first application in those days were piston engines. In a piston engine, the pressure is not atmospheric, the temperature is not 300 K because you get compression. So one important question is, if I know the temperature and the pressure, I know the flame speed, for example in this room, can I guess what the flame speed will be in my engine? Well, if you don't have a code, there's no way of knowing instead of doing an experiment. This equation tells you something about it. For example, here, you see that this number, if you look at it, it's almost a constant, and this one is almost a constant if you don't change the fuel. The only thing in this formula which changes when you change pressure and temperature of the fresh gases is diffusivity. Now, diffusivity, how does diffusivity change? Well, this again comes from kinetic theory. The diffusivity changes typically like the temperature to an exponent which is more than unity. Let me check exactly how much I want to give you for this guy. Okay. So it's T to the power, let's say, gamma, divided by pressure. So typically, if you add more pressure, the diffusivity of a gas goes down. And if the temperature goes up, the diffusivity goes up too. So that tells you that the flame speed at a temperature T1 and P1 divided by the flame speed at the temperature T0 and at pressure P0 is going to be proportional to the diffusion coefficient at T1, P1 divided by the coefficient at T0, P0 to the power 1/2. Okay, because it changed like the square root of that. So it tells you, for example, that if you replace now the dependence of diffusivity with the pressure dependence, you will find that this number changes like P0 divided by P1 to the power 1/2 and T1 divided by T0 divided by gamma over 2. Gamma is of the order, it's a number, gamma, which is of the order of 1.5 to 1.7 for most gases. So what does this tell you? It tells you that when pressure goes up, P1 goes up, flame speed goes down. Okay? Tells you also that if temperature goes up, then the flame speed goes up. In an engine, in a piston engine, the pressure goes up and the temperature goes up at the same time, But if you look at this dependence here, this number is of the order of 0.85. This relation allows you to see if it's going to go up or not in a real engine. So what does it give in practice? If you make a measurement now, and we know how to do that, instead of 0.5 here, in most cases we find something very close to 1/2, 0.45, 0.49. So the experiments really confirm that this dependence is really good. The experiments now, when we look at this number, instead of 0.85, we find more than that. We find a number of the order of 1.5 to 2. So we don't get it right, but we get the right trend. Okay? And so you see, by the way, without doing any numerical computation, these tools allow you to see at least the dependence of the different variables. So let me give you also ideas now about delta and SL. I told you that SL can be as small as 5 to 10 centimeters per second, and it can go up to 10 to 20 meters per second. But this is only for hydrogen flame, typically. Okay. For most hydrocarbons, if you take about methane, propane, kerosene, all these things, you have speeds which go between 5 to 100 meters per second. That's about the right order of magnitude. So if you look, for example, at CH4 air at 300 K and 1 bar, the flame speed will be of the order of 0.5 meters per second. That's the maximum flame speed. 50 centimeters per second. It means if you would ignite a flame in this room, you would see it moving, okay? It doesn't go that fast. You wouldn't have time to leave the room, but still, you would see it coming. Not nice. And what is the diffusion coefficient? The diffusion coefficient in air is of the order of 1.5 10 to the minus 5 meters squared per second. So it gives you a delta, a flame thickness of the order of 30 micrometers. It's an estimate, okay, but it's still, you can see that the flame front is extremely thin. It's like it's not a shock. A shock is even smaller, but still, it's a very thin interface. And when we're going to have to compute it, it's going to raise specific problems, because in 30 micrometers you need to put meshes, and that's going to be difficult. But that's an easy case. If you go to H2O2, what you have, for example, in a rocket engine, at 100 bar, here typically the flame speed is 10 meters per second. The diffusion coefficient D, I call it D1, it's D, is much smaller. It's 1.5 10 to the minus 7. So the flame thickness will be of the order of 0.05 micrometers. And that's really small. And that's really, it's a real problem if you need to compute this thing. So that means if you're looking at a rocket engine, the flame thicknesses you're looking at are really like thin sheets, almost like shocks. And so if you need to resolve that numerically, it's going to be a big problem. Okay. Now I want to go a bit further. I have finished this thing. I want to talk again now about speeds. The first thing you should have noticed is that I have talked about flame speeds as if flame speeds were just one number. But if it's a speed, it's a vector. Okay, so it's not just one number, it has many components. And in the real world, flames will not always propagate in a straight line. So in the general case, we'll need to look at speed, at flame speed, as if it was a vector, which it is actually. So the flame is going to be like a wave which will propagate on the flow itself. So if you take a flame front and you look at it in a fixed reference frame, the flame front will be moving at a speed w. So this is the flame speed in a fixed reference frame. So typically you have a flame in front of you, you see it moving. Why is it moving? The flame is doing two things. The flame first is carried by the flow. Okay? It's exactly like if you're in a boat, you are carried by the current. So the velocity of the flame has to be equal to the velocity of the flow. Plus the propagation speed. Because the flame is not only being carried, it's being carried, and at the same time it's eating the fresh gases. So if I define n here as the normal which goes from the burned gases to the fresh gases, this is fresh and this is burned, here I need to add something which is called the displacement speed multiplied by n. And you see right away that things get more interesting now because you need to think in more than one dimension. And you have already multiple speeds here. So let me tell you what these speeds are. The first speed is SA equal W multiplied by N. This is the absolute flame speed. If you are sitting here, it's really the speed at which you see the flame moving normal to itself. You can see it's just the product of W by the normal. But the displacement speed SD, if you just invert this definition, it's W minus U multiplied by N. And this number here is called the displacement speed. It's really the difference between the flame speed and the flow speed. And there is a last speed, which is the one I prefer actually, which is the consumption speed. The consumption speed is not defined by looking at the way the flame is moving. It's defined only by the rate at which the flame is burning the fuel. I'm going to write the definition and demonstrate it in a few minutes. So it's 1 over minus rho y F1 integral of omega dot F dN. The consumption speed does not depend on the reference frame. You can be in any reference frame. So, okay, what are the links between these speeds? That's a lot of speed, so let me come back to the problem we had before, the 1D flame. In a fixed, in the flame framework. In the flame frame. So that means a reference where the flame is not moving. So remember, the flame looks like this one. This is temperature. And this is the fuel mass fraction. And this is X. So I'm going to do a very simple exercise here. If you take the fuel mass fraction and write it this way, and you integrate this equation from here to here in the fixed reference frame, lots of things are going to go away. This term goes away. I integrate that from minus infinity to plus infinity. So I'm left with a very simple equation, which is ρ1 SL YF. It's the one you have seen just half an hour ago, between minus infinity and plus infinity, equal ρd grad YF, between minus infinity and plus infinity, plus integral of omega dot F dx, or dn. It's the same, it's the normal to the flame front here. X is equal to n in this case, the normal to the flame front. This thing here is nothing else than minus ρ1 SL YF1. Because on this side there is no fuel. I should have plotted that like this actually. This is Y fuel. There is no fuel on the right hand side. We suppose we have a lean flame, still in the same framework. This thing is 0 because the gradients are 0 on both sides, so we are just left with this thing here. And so you see here, you find the definition I was mentioning here, that if you write minus 1 yf integral of the fuel, this gives you the flame speed. It's a way to measure the flame speed. And for this flame here, this number is the same. It's the consumption speed and it's also the displacement speed. Everything is equal for this case. The trick here, of course, is that the absolute speed is 0 because we are not moving. We are in a fixed reference frame. And the reason I'm doing this example first is about the only case where this is true. The speed at which the flame is moving, which is equal to the speed at which the gases are entering the flow here, is exactly equal to the consumption speed, just because of this equation. So you don't have to worry when you talk about a laminar flame. If it's unstretched, premixed, 1D, all the speeds are equal. But it's the only case where this is true. And I'm going to show you now examples where things get, let's say, more complicated. So there are two schools, I would say, to talk about flame speeds. One of these schools works with kinematics. And it's the school where people like to work with the displacement speed, SD. And for example, you have a model which is called the G equation model. Some of you will probably use it if they do combustion, where we basically do kinematics. You try to follow the speed at which the flame front is moving. On the other side, you have another school where people look at consumption rates. That means they look only at SC, the consumption speed. And this is more the world of flamelet models. And my advice is that you want to work with this approach rather than this one. I'm going to use both now in a few examples, but this one is much nicer, much simpler to understand. So let me tell you why. Why is it simpler? Well, a very simple way to understand flame speed in the consumption approach you can imagine that a flame is like a membrane through which you have a flow field Okay, why is it so? If you remember this picture here, I've told you that the flow here at the density ρ1 and the velocity sc. That means that the flow rate here in kilogram per second for 1 square meter of flame, the flow rate which is entering this flame is exactly equal to ρ1 sc. That's the total flow rate. So you can imagine if you have a flame here, it means that the flow rate going through the flame is ρ1 sc, where sc is the consumption speed. That means also that the flow rate of species K going through the flame is m dot k is equal to m dot multiplied by yk. Okay, so it's ρ1 sc yk. So for example, the fuel flow rate, which is entering the flame font, will be m dot fuel equal the density of the fresh gases, the flame speed, SC, multiplied by the Y fuel. That seems like a natural way to formulate it. But if I tell you, for example, that the CO2 flow rate leaving the flame, well, it will be again m dot CO2 equal ρ1 SC Y CO2. Okay? Don't need to worry about what the speed is on the burn side. You don't need to worry about the density on the burn side. The flow rate will be always the fresh gases density multiplied by the flame speed multiplied by the fuel mass fraction of CO2 in the burn gases. Those fluxes here are kilograms per second and square meter, okay? Which means that if you have a surface S here, the total flux going through this surface will be ρ1 SC multiplied by the surface. And we're actually going to be able to write conservation of mass flux with this formula. We know that if there is a flux entering here, it has to go through the flame exactly at this rate. And so if we know the consumption speed, we can determine the flame position. So let's do a simple example for smoking people. If you have a lighter, you know I'll take the simplest example. You don't need to smoke now, okay? Let's just do it later. Let's assume here that you are sending premix gases. And for the moment, we're going to take a 2D case. So it's going to be 2D, like this one, okay? It's two-dimensional. And we have a flame here. So the first question is, if I have here a flow, a velocity which is u, a flat profile of velocity here, what will be the flame length? You will have a flame which will look like this one. What will be the flame length? It's really a basic problem if you work in combustion. You don't want to make a mistake. If the flame is 10 meters long or 1 centimeter, you need to be able to say that before. So it's the same as trying to find the angle of the flame here, alpha. So I'm going to do that for you with the two methods, the kinematic method and the consumption method. And you will see that for this case, of course, you find the same result, but it can be a difficult game sometimes. So let me make a zoom here on this zone. What we have here is a velocity of the flow itself, which is u, which is like this. And it's a vector which has a component u and 0. I will assume that the flow here remains parallel. So I'm doing here the displacement, the kinematic solution. Now, the normal n is like this. Okay? The flame normal here, I should have put that in red actually. This is the flame font, and this is the normal to the flame font. The normal to the flame font has coordinates minus sine alpha and minus cos alpha. Okay, it's just trigonometry. You take this angle here, it's also here. And so what is the condition to find the place at which the flame will sit? Well, we know that the flame speed, W is u, the velocity of the flow, plus the flame speed as d multiplied by n. So these particles here, they are moving, okay? And they are moving. The point is that the flame will not move if these particles are moving exactly along the flame front. This is where the kinematic interpretation is difficult to guess. That means when the flame is steady, saying that the flame is steady is equivalent to say that the velocity here of the particles which follow the flame is actually going in this direction. So it's perpendicular to the normal. So in other words, it's like saying W dot n equals 0. This is the condition which gives you the angle at which the flame will lie. If you just solve that, it will give you U scalar n equal minus SD, and U scalar n, you use this thing multiplied by this one, and you find sine alpha equal SD over U. So it's kind of a trivial result. In the end, it's like if you're trying to cross a river and you move normally here on your boat at a speed SD, the angle here is sine alpha equal SD divided by U. And so if you know the alpha here, you can find the flame length after that. Okay? And that's the way you would do it if you use the kinematic method. If you use the consumption method, you don't do the same thing. You will see, of course, you arrive at the same result. We're just going to write that the flow rate is continuous. So we're going to say that the flow rate here, so look, this is the dangerous part here. I define a surface here, which is this one. There is a flow rate going out of this surface. And this flow rate, where does it go? Well, there's not much place to go, okay? They have to go through the flame front. So the flow rate on this surface one here has to go through this place here. So the flame will look like this. So the flow has to leave by these two faces here. And the rate at which it goes to the surface, we know it. It's ρ1 SC. So if you just write that the flow rate here is equal to the flow rate on the flame, well, it's not a big story here. The flow rate here, you know the density ρ1. You know the height here. I'm going to call that here 2h. That's the width of the hole here. So the flow rate here is just ρ1 multiplied by 2h multiplied by the length. Let me call this here the length L multiplied by the velocity. So this is simply the cold reactants entering through this surface here. And they have to leave now through this surface here. The first face on the top and the other face on the bottom. And what are the flow rates here? Well, it's the same. It's ρ1 SC multiplied by 2xL, where x is this length. Okay, the surface here of one of these faces is x multiplied by L. So you just solve that and you find right away x equal to HU over SL. And of course, from that you can find the sine of the angle, the sinus of the angle, which is just h over x, and is also equal to SC divided by U. Of course, you find the same result. If the two speeds are the same, you end up with the same angle. But you see here, we didn't have to talk about vectors. And here we're writing something which is global. Here you need to think about local quantities. In practice, you will see that this is much easier. There's a homework that you should do, which is the following. Do the same exercise for your lighter, where you have a hose like this. So here you have a density ρ1, a velocity u, a flame speed SL. What will be the length of the flame here? It's a very, very classical exercise. Okay, so let me show you now cases where things get a little bit more exciting. So we're going to take a classical example, which is the ignition of a spherical flame. This is what happens all the time in explosions, for example. So here you start a flame in a premixed flow. So it will be a sphere if the flow is laminar. Here you have fresh gases. And here you have hot gases at state 2. And here you have the radius r of t. And this flame will go. And the question is, at which speed will this thing move? So of course you could say, well, it's going to move at the flame speed. That would be a big mistake. You will see in a minute that if you have a system like this point does not move at all at the flame speed. It moves much faster than that. So why is it so? Well, again, you can find it easily with the consumption method, and you cannot find it with the displacement method at all. It's much more complicated. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to write a balance on CO2, for example. So what does it mean? I'm trying to guess how much CO2 I have here. Initially I have 0, and the CO2 is growing. The mass of CO2 in a system like this, I know it. The mass of CO2 is equal to 4/3 of pi r cubed. The volume of the sphere multiplied by the density of the burnt gases multiplied by the fuel mass fraction in the burnt gases. Okay, this is how much CO2 I have here. Now, how much CO2 do I do per unit second? I know that. I have told you that if I have a surface S here, I know the flow rate of CO2 through the surface. I know this flow rate has to be the surface, 4 pi s squared, multiplied by ρ1 SC y CO2. So this has to be equal to the derivative of the mass of CO2 versus time. So if you just solve this equation, you use these two things together, you find dr dt coming from the derivative of this guy, the 4 pi r squared simplify, and you find dr dt equal ρ1 over ρ2 SC. So you see now that the absolute speed, this is really SA, the absolute speed. If I'm sitting here and I'm watching this flame go, it's not going at the flame speed. It's going at the flame speed multiplied by ρ1 over ρ2. ρ1 over ρ2, the ratio of densities, is approximately equal to T2 over T1. It's a number of the order of 10. Okay, so if you have a laminar flame speed of 1 meter per second, this thing will grow at 10 meters per second. So it's a big difference. Okay, and you can see right away that flame speeds here are not so simple anymore. Why is it so? That's a good question, actually. Why is it that this point is going faster than it should? Well, you have to think that if you are here, you are a piece of the flame here, and you try to swallow these elements here of fresh gases. You're going to burn them at this flow rate, but they are much lighter than the cold gases. The density has gone down. So it's not only that you need to burn them, it's the fact that you need to expand now to make space for them. And this is why you get the ratio ρ1 over ρ2 here. So you see the flame is moving here much faster because of density changes, this ρ1 over ρ2. Which means that when people do measurements to measure flame speeds here, they measure dr over dt, that you just have to look at it, and then they have to compensate for the density change to find the real flame speed. Because this is not the flame speed. dr dt is not the flame speed. It's the speed at which the flame moves. In this case, it has nothing generic in it. It would change in any other cases. So that raises questions when you're looking at flows like this. Don't trust absolute flame speeds. Won't give you the right results. Okay, I don't think I'm going to elaborate more on flame speeds. I suggest that you read chapter 2 about premix flames in the book. There are more examples of sophisticated flame speed. Just remember one thing. The flow rate going through a surface S of flame at the flame speed Sc is equal to this expression. If you know that, you can do almost everything you need to do in combustion. Now, I need to talk about something a little bit more complicated now. I have everything I've done here. Basically, I've kept two cases where the displacement speed would be equal to the consumption speed. I need to talk now about stretch. Stretch is something which leads to situation where the displacement speed and the consumption speed are not equal anymore. And so we need to discuss a little bit what stretch is. So what is stretch? Well, basically stretch is what you believe it is. It's if you take a flame and you pull it like this, you stretch it. If you take this flame here at a given instant and you take the same flame later, it has more surface. Okay? So you stretch it. Okay, it's like a gene, you know, you stretch it. This is an easy way to understand stretch, and the definition of stretch is the following. Stretch in a flame is 1 over the surface multiplied by dA over dt, where A is the surface. So it's in second minus 1. And it tells you how many times you increase the flame surface per unit of time. You can stretch a flame very strongly, like here you can stretch it very fast, or you can stretch it not so fast. The point is that when you plot stretch here in seconds minus 1, and here you plot Sd, the consumption speed and the displacement speeds, they are both equal at 0 stretch, which is what we've been doing in the past hours. We had 0 stretch, all these flames were just propagating. But then they change when you increase stretch. So this would be Sd, for example, and this would be Sc. So in general, when stretch is not 0, you're stretching the flame, the consumption speed and the displacement speed are different. There's something funny about stretch is that if you stretch something too much, you break it. What is breaking for us in combustion, it's what we call quenching. Here, if you're trying to stretch a flame too much, it will just quench. What does it mean, quench? Well, the flame stops. You have no flame anymore. And we'll talk about that in the turbulent combustion course. Just remember for the moment that if the flame is stretched, and most flames in the real world are stretched, then the flame speeds are different. Okay, let me finish now with flammability limits. Another very important characteristics of premix flames. Another very important thing when you do combustion is to know how much fuel you should put in your gas, in your air, to get a certain result. So I'm going to plug here the equivalence ratio and here, for example, I'm going to put the T2, the temperature of the burn gases. Equivalence ratio equal to unity is here. This is when you're just stoichiometric. And remember, everything I've done in the last 2 hours was for very lean flames. What means lean? Lean means you have to be on this side. These are lean flames. And here you have rich flames. So I've been working very close here to the leanest cases I can do. A very important thing is how does the maximum temperature T2 change with the equivalence ratio? Well, you know that. At least you know it in this case. Remember, on this for very lean flames, we have proved that T2 is equal to T1 plus Q YF1 over Cp. Now the equivalence ratio phi is SYF1 over YO1. So this is nothing else than T1 plus Q phi YO1 divided by CPS. So it's a linear function of phi. So here, if I increase temperature, if I increase the equivalence ratio temperature, the maximum temperature goes up. So this curve here must be T2 equal T1 plus Q YF1 over Cp. But then I haven't done any derivation afterwards, okay? I haven't told you what to do here or what to do on the rich flame. I'm just going to plot now the result, and the result is the following. The curve looks like this. It makes sense, you know, if you have too much fuel, it's exactly like having too much air. It's symmetrical. So at some point here you have a lot of fuel, but you don't have enough air. The temperature has to go down. And the maximum is close to 1. Depends. Usually it's on the other side. I should have put 1 here. And the curve looks like this one. Now, as you can see, that means that the stoichiometric here is the warmest in general. Let me take it in another way now. I am stoichiometric and I'm decreasing the fuel. I'm putting less and less and less fuel and less fuel. What's going to happen? At some point, and this is what we call flammability limits, if you don't have enough fuel in a flow, the thing will completely stop. So here, this curve does not go to 0 like this. It stops in a discontinuous way. And here, this point here is called the lean flammability limit. And you are probably waiting that this one is called the rich flammability limit. And what does it mean? It means that if you have a mixture of fuel and air, if I take this room and I open a bottle of gas here, in the beginning, and I need to mix things, okay? If things are not mixed, it's different. But if I mix things for a long time, the concentration of fuel will be such that the equivalence ratio will be low and it will not be dangerous. You will still be able to smoke in this room and nothing will happen. Then, if you wait for a long, long, long time, you come back in 2 months, there will be so much fuel here that it will be the same, okay? There will be just too much fuel for combustion to occur, will be beyond the rich flammability limit. So there's only a window in which things are dangerous. And the window is when you are below the rich limit and beyond the lean limit. When you are here, then you can have a flame. So it's very interesting, for example, if you are here, you have a box full of gases, you ignite it, and the flame does not start. There's just too much fuel, not enough air. The same thing on the other way here. These two limits here are typically, if this is for 1 bar, 300 K, so this is the pressure of the fresh gases and the temperature of the fresh gases. You have a number here for most hydrocarbons, which is 0.6 here. And here it's of the order of 2. So it's not that wide, okay? You have to be careful. If you are on the other side, it's not going to burn. Now, how do these things change if you change the temperature? If you go, for example, in a piston engine, the temperature of the cold gases is not going to be cold, it's going to be hot. You're going to have, instead of 300 K, you're going to have 600, 700 K or more. Then the curve will look like this. The speed will be larger. And the temperature also will be larger. And then the flammability limit will extend like this. In other words, you go from here to there before you get quenching. So this is for a temperature T'1 larger than T1. So why is this important? Let me write it down. If the fresh gas temperature goes up, the flammability limits expand. And of course, if you take another fuel, a fuel which is much more sensitive or much easier to burn, you can also have different flammability limits. The most known example is hydrogen. Hydrogen is something which is really awful in terms of safety, because hydrogen is a small molecule, so it leaks everywhere. And hydrogen is able to burn in air at a very wide range of occurrence ratios, much wider than methane or propane. So this is why people in the combustion community don't like hydrogen so much. Okay, it's not your friend in practice. So why is it important? Well, you need to know it. Of course, if you want to build a system, you need to be able to predict if it's going to burn or not. First thing. It's also important in terms of safety. In terms of safety, for example, if you want to build a system in which you're going to have to mix these gases, you need to know before if it's going to be dangerous or not. Playing with flammability limits can be a dangerous game. Not the example here is not sufficient to explain everything, but if you remember some of the Apollo program, they burnt a few, three of them actually, astronauts, and this was done exactly to this problem. In Apollo, for example, what they tried to do is to increase the amount of oxygen. When you send people to the moon, it's stupid to carry nitrogen with you, so you would like to have more oxygen. When you put oxygen with metal, this was what they had in Apollo, you change the flammability limits, and at that point, it's enough to scratch something against the wall to get combustion started. It wouldn't do with normal air, but it does if you start, having more oxygen than what you thought. So it's the same problem. You need to know the safety limits, so you need to know the flammability limits when you start playing with this kind of mixtures. Again, if you're on this side, you're safe. If you're on that side, you're safe. But here, you're not safe. Now, if you forget about safety and you come back to the world of engine production, you see also there's something interesting here. It's that if you want to save fuel, and I guess all of us want to do that today, you cannot decrease the amount of fuel below the flammability limit. And the best example of that is an example we see every day, which is car engine. In a car engine, you are basically, let's talk about what classical engines, they call indirect injection. That means you inject the fuel here, upstream, and you can assume that when the fuel and the air come into the engine, it's almost premixed. Okay, it's a mixture which is perfect, almost perfect. By the time you burn it, it's actually quite perfect. And you want this engine, you need to have a powerful engine for the highway, but when you are stopping and your engine is idling at a light, for example, you would like to be able to decrease the power of this engine. What do you need? You just need the power needed by the engine to keep running. So it's almost no consumption. It's a few horsepower. But you cannot do that in a piston engine, because at each time the piston goes down, it will swallow the same amount of air. So you have a certain amount of air. And you need to put the minimum amount of fuel to do that, to be on this side, or on this side here. If you put less air than that, it won't burn. So that means in a piston engine, like the classical engines which you see on the road today, that's their main problem for gasoline engine, is that when they're idling at a light, they need to swallow the same amount of air, and so they need to put the same amount of fuel. So you could say, well, if they do that, you have too much power, so how do you prevent that? What you do basically is that you're going to produce maybe, I don't have the numbers here, you're going to produce 6 or 10 horsepower, because you're injecting all this fuel, and to avoid that the engine goes faster, you're going to choke it. Basically, you're going to waste this power. And where do you waste it? Well, what you do here, in the intake, you put a system to block the air. And so basically the engine is doing, every time it wants to swallow air, you're basically preventing the air to go down. That creates a lot of losses, and this is where you're losing basically 8 horsepower. And the remaining 2 are the only thing you would need normally. So this is the problem in a classical gasoline engine, is that when the engine is idling, you're burning much too much fuel. There is a solution to that, which we all know. It's direct injection. In a direct injection engine, you're not going to do it that way. You're not going to have here a perfectly mixed zone. You are just going to inject the fuel directly in the chamber in a small zone. This zone will be beyond the flammability limit, but this zone here will not burn at all. So in a direct injection engine or in a diesel engine, this is what we will have. We'll have a case where we don't try to burn things by mixing everywhere, fuel and air. We'll just try to have a zone where mixing takes place. And this takes me to the conclusion here, is that there are cases where these premix flames have problems, and we need to go to situations where we don't premix things before we burn. And this is what we call diffusion flames. Or in the general case, let's say non-premix flames. And those flames are also useful, and this is what we'll need to study next time. The main difference now, when we're going to start doing that next week, is that the premix flames were easy somehow, because we didn't have to care about mixing. Everything was mixed before we went into the chamber. Now for diffusion flames, we're going to have to do the mixing and the combustion at the same time. Okay? This will be the topic of next